Well, welcome everybody to the virtual REI Academy meetup. We meet the third Tuesday of every month. We usually do it at the Timbuktu restaurant in Hanover and then also on Facebook as well. And our speaker is out of town. And so we decided to do it as if it was COVID. So we have a virtual speaker today. And Jerry was gracious enough to accommodate us. We're very, very grateful for him doing that. Jerry Lotz does cost segregation. He's been doing this for quite a while, super successful at it. His company does stuff all over the country, and we were just talking before the event, and he actually does stuff overseas as well. Cost segregation, he'll go into this a lot more obviously, but cost segregation is something that I first learned about in multifamily and have had great success with it. People that we work with have had great success with it. Jerry's done a ton of work for people that we know and always had tremendous savings in taxes. And obviously, it's not the money you make, it's the money you keep. And like a lot of things, like with safety in cars and stuff like that, a lot of luxury cars get the stuff up front. They go through all of the research and then it trickles down into more common cars. And kind of the same thing I think has happened with multifamily and cost segregation. It started off in multifamily. And I think what happened was people in single family said, hey, we can use this too. Here's a way we can make more money. So now cost segregation is making a huge impact on single family and the investors and getting them to keep a lot more money in their pocket, working with Jerry and his organization. So having said that, Jerry, I'm going to pass it over to you. It's all yours.
Thank you, James. Always a pleasure to work with you and the folks involved at the Academy. Thank you. I really appreciate it. So let's see if the screen share is working now.
Yes, it is.
Okay, perfect. So let's do this and see if I can put this into presentation mode. Look at that. Okay. So again, thanks for allowing me to share some information. And so I'm Jerry Lotz, and I work for myself. And what I've done over the last 5-6 years is put together a offering of a few different companies that are all involved with helping individuals and businesses save money in a number of areas in which they spend money. Cost segregation by far is the lion's share of what I do. And I like to say that friends don't let friends overpay for anything. So when I first learned about cost segregation, oh gosh, 6 or so years ago, I was amazed that something like this even existed. In fact, I've heard it referred to as the eighth wonder of the world because it really does increase cash flow and generate some unprecedented tax savings. So just a little bit about me. I'm a Baltimore native, born and bred in Baltimore. I spent a number of years in medical sales and traveled fairly extensively across different parts of the country and really enjoyed that work, but always had a gnawing in the back of my mind that I wanted to do something on my own. So after about 35 years in medical sales, I decided, you know what? I'm at the point in my life where if I'm going to do something on my own, I got to do it now. But I'm not going to do it unless I could find what I considered the best in class companies to represent. I wanted to go to sleep at night knowing that the companies that I represent have my back and the backs of my clients. So I really enjoy what I do. I tell the story oftentimes. A few years ago, I went on vacation. My wife and I've been married at that time about 40 years. And we went to one of our favorite places in Maine, and it's Sunday, and we're driving home after the week. And I said, you know what, Marge, I don't have the Sunday night blues. I got to get up and go back to work tomorrow, but I love what I do, and I don't have the blues about doing it. So I feel really good about what I'm doing. I feel great about working with investors, bringing good news to investors. All of a sudden, the light bulb goes off that, hey, I've heard this happen for the mega $1 million companies, and now it's available for mom and pop investor like you and me. So the company that I represent that really does the engineering-based work, the heavy lifting, is a company called CSSI, Cost Segregation Services Incorporated. They've been in business a little bit over 20 years. Their founder and chief executive officer owner of the company, Jim Shreve, was actually instrumental in bringing cost segregation to the mainstream. When the terminology of cost segregation first came about, it was reserved for the mega $1 million buildings. The only the big four accounting firms had access to it. But now, through experience and technology, we can actually provide a service to building owners who have a building that is $150,000 and over. So the company CSSI represents been around 20 years. We've done over 30,000 projects, anything from $150,000 townhome to $1 billion+ resorts. So now to really get into the meat of it, well, what is cost segregation? So the technical definition of it is really the process of analyzing and identifying residential rental, multifamily, and commercial building components that are eligible for accelerated depreciation. So when you and I earn our income, we have an income that we make, and then there are deductions that offset the income. The more deductions we have to offset the income, the less taxes we're going to pay. Cost segregation accelerates the depreciation, and we all know that depreciation is a deduction against the income that's generated. So the more accelerated depreciation, the more deductions offset the income, the less in taxes we're going to pay, the more cash that stays in our pocket instead of writing a check to the IRS. I love this analogy. When I was in this business for just about a week, one of our VPs said, you know what? Take a look at this. Look on the screen. What's it look like? It's a double-decker hamburger. So let's equate that hamburger to a building. So it's one entity. The hamburger is a building. Now, for those of you listening that are old enough to remember the McDonald's jingle for a Big Mac, two all beef patties, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickles, onions on a sesame seed bun. We actually take this Big Mac and using it in straight line depreciation. So depreciating that building as a whole, we'll come up with one number. But if we actually look at that building and break it down into its integral parts, we are going in and on that $150,000 building, we're breaking that down into its integral parts. So in this Big Mac hamburger, we're going in and placing values on the all beef patties, maybe worth $2.75. Special sauce may be worth another quarter. Lettuce may be worth 20 cents. Pickles may be worth 3 cents. All of a sudden, those different values add up to that $4.99 Big Mac. And some of those items that make up that Big Mac now can be eligible for accelerated depreciation. So if you think of a Big Mac and think about breaking it down, gives you a good idea of what cost segregation does to a building. So if you look at a typical building, regardless of what kind of a building it is, maybe it's a single condo, maybe it's a townhome, maybe it's a single family home. All of the buildings, for the most part, are going to have decorative elements. There's probably some specialty plumbing, special electricity in there, carpets, countertops, cabinets. A lot of those elements can be carved out. A lot of those assets can be carved out of that longer term 27.5-year depreciation and depreciated over 5 or 7 years according to the tax code. The landscaping that's involved there, even if there's a little parking pad or a small parking lot, and even if there's lines on that parking lot, we can put values on the assets that are there. Even the lines on the parking lot can be carved out and depreciated more quickly. Who benefits and who qualifies? Well, as I mentioned, years ago, it was only the mega $1 million building owners that qualified. But now, you and I that own a $150,000 townhouse can certainly qualify for tax savings through cost segregation. And I'll tell you another secret too. Sometimes we work with business owners that are going and paying rent, so they are leasing properties. and they're putting their own money into those properties that they may be paying somebody else rent for. Well, the money that they're putting that's their own money into improving that property can also be something that can be segregated for tax savings. Any different kind of building, you name it, it can be cost segregated. Farms, medical buildings, cannabis companies, just about anything you can think of. And of course, residential rental, multifamily is a huge area, and just about any type of commercial building. Over the last 5 or 6 years, the government has instituted some amazing tax savings laws that I'd like to classify them as gifts. 2014 was probably the start of the biggest tax change since 1986 in the Reagan years. In 2014, there was something called the Tangible Property Regulations. 2017, something called the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, and then the CARES Act of 2020. I don't want to get too far into the weeds with the minutia of some of these laws, but I think there's a few highlights that are worthy of discussion here because it pertains to everyday folks like you and I and what we can save on our taxes. In a broader scope, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about this in a few examples. So there's something called partial disposition. And when we would go in and put values on the assets that make up a building, and then the next year somebody goes and improves that building, they are disposing of some of the assets that are in that property. They're throwing things into the dumpster. We can actually find tax savings on the portions that they're throwing into the dumpster, and then another tax savings on the assets that they are improving. So just a quick example here. This automobile dealership went and they bought a building. So they bought a building, and we broke out the components on that initial building that they bought, saved them $134,000 in taxes. Then, based on the stuff that they threw into the dumpster, we were able to find another $53,000 in taxes. Then the actual renovation that they did, we found another $126,000 in tax savings. Total of $314,000 in tax savings. So some of these numbers can be quite significant. Going back a little bit further, one of the 2014 tax law changed to where you could actually go back and look at the ways that you accounted for improvements made over the years, and any improvements that were made in buildings before 2014 can now get a second look. And if they fall into certain classifications based on the new law, things that were capitalized or things that you had to depreciate over that long term may very well now be able to be expensed right off the bat. So we do a lot of this type of analysis too. It really makes a big financial impact in some of the larger buildings. And I know a lot of you folks now that have single family homes will probably grow into multifamily and maybe even commercial property. So this might be something a little further down the road. The one law, the Tax Cut and Jobs Act of 2017, I like to say that it really put cost segregation on steroids, because remember a few slides ago when we talked about these 5, 7, and 15-year assets, and you could depreciate them now instead of over the 27.5-year cycle. You could really depreciate them in 5, 7, and 15 years. Well, that was great, and it really helped in some significant tax savings. But now this Tax Cut and Job Act says that everything that you find, or that we would find, that would be classified in 5, 7, and 15 years can now be written off at 100% in the first year of ownership. So anything that was bought after September 27, 2017, up through the end of this year, actually. So if you've got some properties that were bought in that specific time frame, any of the assets that are reclassified 5, 7, and 15 years could be written off 100%. So maybe there's some catch-up depreciation tax savings that may be out there in some of the houses that you're renting right now. I wanted to bring this up as an example to show you, and let me make this a little bit bigger here. So this is a larger building, $2.2 million, but this property was purchased in 2018. Okay, so it falls within the confines of that Tax Cut and Jobs Act. Using a traditional straight line depreciation method, that owner would be able to write off $76,000 for tax year 2018. We come along and reclassifying those assets, we now help that owner to legitimately write off not $76,000, but $509,000 in depreciation expense. So, and at a 37% tax bracket, that's where he was. We actually saved him from stroking a check to the IRS for $188,000. So I don't know about you, but that's pretty darn significant. I think one of my favorite studies that I did for a similar building owner, and this person owned a number of Dunkin' Donut locations. So he's looking at an income one year, 2019, of a little over $1 million. So he's got 10 locations out there and $1 million worth of income, looking for ways not to pay taxes on that $1 million. That same year, he happens to spend $1.2 million building another facility. So he already had the ground, but he put a nice blacktop on it, nice lines on the parking lot, beautiful canopies, drive-through, outside sitting area, state-of-the-art interior. Of that $1.2 million that he spent, we were able to find $620,000 that he could write off in year one. So now he's not paying taxes on $1 million. He's paying taxes on $1 million less the $620,000. So we saved him well over $200,000 in tax expense. So let me resize this and get it to where I can move it to another screen here. And this is even on a little bit of a larger scale. This is a large apartment complex. First year, they would be able to write off $690,000 of the $24 million that they spent. We come along and reclassify a lot of those assets that can be depreciated now at 100% because of the new tax law, find an extra $3.7 million worth of deductions. So he's saving $1,379,000 in federal taxes. And a study like this, the cost for the client to be able to have us perform a study like this after tax. So before tax, it's probably, $16,000, $18,000. After tax turns into, because that's also a deduction. So after tax, that would turn into probably closer to $10,000 or $11,000. So imagine spending $10,000 to save $1.3 million in taxes. That's a significant return on investment. I love this little analogy here. This was a 6-unit apartment building, and I'm sure some of you out there listening probably got some 6-unit apartment buildings in your focus for the future. So this project was August of 2017, $668,000 building costs. We estimated that we would find the client $96,000 worth of deductions. When it was all said and done, same building cost, $668,000. Our engineers actually found $109,000 worth of deductions to save that client about $27,000 in tax expense. This is where I'd like to spend a couple of extra minutes in just breaking this down. So in that building, you can see we had found some 5-year assets, some 15-year assets, and the cabinets and millwork in there were worth $21,625,000. Molding's worth another X amount of dollars. All of these assets that we found have a specific dollar value on them. And when you add them up, you can take them out of the longer term $668,000 and now have $136,000 that can be written off in year one instead of writing off 1/27th of $668,000. So that's what accelerates that depreciation. That's what gives them, they have the extra deductions, so they're saving on taxes. This particular site had some exterior fencing with it that also had a value, and they had some concrete work as well for an extra $6,000. So of that $668,000, 78.6% of it still remains in that long-term depreciation cycle, but now almost 21.5% is written off in the first year. So how does this happen? Based on the tax law and based on the expertise of construction engineers, they are able to go in and take a fine-tooth comb to a building. So somebody says, yeah, I like the idea, I like the estimate that's come about. What's the next step? Well, the next step is they sign an engagement letter, and then we go and collect every bit of information that the client has about that building. Some clients come to us with stacks and stacks of blueprints, drawings, file CAD drawings, whatever. And other clients have very little information that they were able to get on that property. Maybe there was an appraisal, maybe there wasn't. We will take whatever information is out there, turn it into our engineers and analysts. That's part of what they use. The next step that's critically important is somebody physically going to that property and doing a site visit. If it's anywhere at all possible within 5 hours or so of driving distance, I love to do that myself, because oftentimes it's an opportunity to spend some quality time with the building owner to learn some things that may not have come out on paper, but maybe in a discussion, to learn some things that may be helpful in extra tax savings. So I'll go there and take hundreds of pictures of the inside and the outside of that property. Then once the pictures and the drawings are into our engineers in Louisiana, that project goes through, then we've got a complete package. That package will go through one set of engineers and analysts, move to another set for double check, and then move to a final quality assurance team to triple check to make sure that everything is correct. And then from there, we will publish these final numbers that go to the CPA or accountant, and they will apply this to the tax return. It's funny, we work with accountants all across the country. Some are very adept, very astute at this process, and others we're helping them through this for the first time. So we're always excited about getting on the phone with an accountant that has not had a whole lot of experience with this and kind of coaching them through the process. You minimize this a little and go to the next screen. So we broke the assets in that property down into real small increments. But now, in addition to that, we also put values on what's called the critical building systems that are in that property. So in that 6-unit apartment, there was a ceiling system that today was worth $11,000. If that client went to replace that, we feel that the replacement cost is going to be $27,000. The doors and frames today were worth $25,000. If they were looking to replace them, we estimate it would cost them $63,000. These numbers become critical tax planning tools for expenditures in the future, and whether they become decision-making tools really for deciding whether a future expenditure has to be capitalized or if you can write it off in the first year. They're also important numbers to have in the event that you ever had a fire or an insurance claim for that particular property. All of a sudden now, you've got a fire and the whole electrical system is burnt up, disintegrated, and the insurance company says, well, that electrical system, to replace that, we're going to allocate $150,000 to replace that electrical system. You can now come back to them and say, hey, wait a minute, I just had a engineering-based study done on that property, and they say that the replacement cost for that electrical system is $244,000. Now you've got some credible information to be able to go back and get some more money that's due to you. I mentioned those numbers are tax planning numbers. So without getting too deep into the weeds, I'll just mention that the IRS has what's called a 1/3 ratio. And if you are spending more than 1/3 on a particular building system, more than 1/3 of its replacement cost value in it, to improve that building system, that you better consider depreciating that expenditure over the long term. And I'll use this example to show you. This HVAC system was $179,000 HVAC system. So this client goes in and spends $50,000 on repairing that. Well, doing the numbers, $50,000 is less than 1/3 of the replacement cost of this HVAC system. They're going to be able to write off that entire $50,000 in the year in which they spent it. If they decided, well, I'm going to do a larger upgrade and spent $100,000 upgrading that HVAC system, $100,000 is well over 1/3 ratio. So they better consider capitalizing that $100,000 and depreciating it over the longer term. So if you know what these values are, you can make good tax planning, operational decision for the expenditures that you're going to make going forward in order to be able to write off as much as you possibly can in the year in which you made those improvements. This is just another example of another property. Gosh, let's see here. Sorry about that, James. Let's figure this out here. Let's see, X5. We'll fast forward that and go back to that next example. So
All
this,
good.
one more. Yep, there it is. This is another example of $1 million property and how the assets broke out. A lot of assets redistributed into the 5-year. And again, instead of taking that $1 million and writing it off over 27.5 years, now that client's got $209,000 they can expense out in the first year of ownership. I love this example. This really is kind of mainstream, and I'm sure will hit home to a lot of our viewers tonight. This particular property is a $180,000 townhome. So the client bought it. I believe they paid a little over $200,000 for it. The land was worth about $50,000. They put another $30,000 into it. So now that building value is $180,000. It was in a little community, a townhome community. So they had some landscaping, sidewalks, exterior fencing, and things that could be carved out and put into this 15-year category. And remember what we said about everything that was from 2018 to 2022, that every asset that could be reclassified into 5, 7, or 15 years can now be written off at 100%. So they're able to take these 15-year assets and write these off at 100%. They're able to take these 5-year assets and now write them off at 100%. So out of that $180,000 building value, they've got close to, close to $36,000 worth that they can expense in the first year of ownership. So now that they've got all these extra deductions that they never would have had before, these extra deductions go to offset their income. They're saving significantly on their taxes for that year. And again, this $180,000 building had the same components that make it up. So we put values on the ceiling systems today and the cost to replace it, values on the doors and frames and the cost to replace it, to where the entire building value at 100% to replace it in today's dollars would be $268,000. Over the years, there have been a number of misconceptions around cost segregation. So a lot of people say, well, you can only do it right after you buy the property. That's not true. Ideally, the best time to do it is in the year in which you purchase a property, because you're going to start off fresh from scratch that tax year with maximizing your tax savings. But we see a lot of instances where folks will go buy a property 1 year, and for whatever reason, they'll wait 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years before we ever come into the picture. I would never turn down an opportunity to prepare a free estimate of tax savings if the clients own the property 20 years or more. There always is an opportunity to look, because you just don't know until you take a closer look. A lot of folks have said, well, my building's just not worth enough. Well, years past, that might have been true. In fact, today, there are a number of companies out there that won't touch a property that's less than $500,000. As I mentioned, we love to find tax savings for mainstream mom and pop investors like you and I on buildings valued at $150,000 and above. Some folks think that it is too costly. Years ago, that was true. Now, costs are coming down. That $180,000 building, if I'm not mistaken, the cost was probably around $2,500, $2,600 for us to do that work. So $2,500, $2,600, that's also a deduction. So in real after-tax money, that's probably $1,800 or $2,000. For that $1,800 or $2,000, we ended up saving the client $13,000 in taxes. So almost a 6-to-1 return on that client's investment for us to be able to do these calculations and save them on taxes.
A little better than the stock market, huh?
Exactly. Some folks say, well, doesn't my CPA already do this? You know, there's some great CPAs and accountants out there. And a lot of them do a great job. I mentioned a lot of them are very astute, very familiar with this, but they're not, in all due respect, they are not construction engineers. They're not engineers, period. It really takes a forensic construction engineer to go and fine tune and dig out every last penny of tax savings. Most CPA firms also, they don't want the liability in doing this. That's why they hire or contract or refer folks like us to work with their clients to provide the calculations that they will use to implement into the tax return so that the client saves money. So if I do this, will it trigger an audit? Interesting question. And the answer really is the fact that somebody does a cost segregation study in and of itself won't necessarily trigger an audit. It's usually something else that creeps out of the client's closet that the IRS wants to scrutinize. And when they want to scrutinize a tax return or scrutinize a client, they drag everything into it. So our work gets drug into it too. I can sleep at night knowing that in 30 years or 20 years of the company that I work for doing this, our work has gotten drug into it sometimes, but never has the IRS overturned any of the work that we've done on behalf of a client. And our cost to do a project also includes us representing our work that we've done should the client come under a scrutiny situation. Other folks think, well, I've been doing this for a couple of years on this particular building using straight line depreciation. Now, if I implement this cost segregated model, I've got to go back and amend tax returns. That's not true either. There is a one-time filing of what's called a change of accounting method form with the IRS, because we are changing from a straight line method to a segregated method. But we complete that paperwork for the client, for the tax professional. The client and tax professional sign off on that, and then there is a one-time catch-up adjustment that we calculate as well. So that was a long answer, but the bottom line is there's no need to amend a past tax return. It's just a matter of letting the IRS know that you're changing the accounting method, and then coming back with that adjustment, that what they call that 481A adjustment, where we can pick up that catch-up depreciation that we've missed out on. If I sell the building, I'll have to give it all back. If you are buying a building, fixing it, and flipping a building, I would not recommend doing this exercise of cost segregation. If you're going to buy it and hold it for a year, it may still not be worth the squeeze of the money that you're spending to us to have the work and the benefit that you're going to get out of it. But certainly something that you're going to buy and hold for 3, 4, 5 years or longer, it's the value of that money that you can have today in your pocket. What can you do with that money? You can better service the loan. You can make improvements to this building. You can use as down payments for future buildings. And then when you sell the building 5, 10, 15 years down the road, honestly, you'll have to give some of the savings back, but you've had that money so long that you've been able to exponentially grow that money, put it to good use, help your business, help your family. So one other thing that I'd like to mention, and we talked about it a little bit, it was in that partial asset disposition, where we talked about taking a portion of that building, throwing it into the dumpster, improving it, and making renovations there. If you buy a building in one tax year and make those improvements in the same tax year that you buy that building, you would not be able to qualify for calculating the value of the assets that you threw into the dumpster. But if you bought that building, say, the end of 2021, say October 2021, and then in 2022, January, you decided to put new carpets in there, you decided to replace the deck and the fence out there, then because you're doing it in separate tax years, then the value of what you're actually throwing into the dumpster can be calculated for additional tax savings. You can actually calculate the value of the assets, the partial assets that you're disposing of and throwing into the dumpster. So the reason behind that is the IRS feels that if you're buying it in one tax year and making those improvements immediately, then you're buying it with the idea in mind that you are making improvements immediately before you really, in the same year that you're buying that property. You're making the buy with the intention of making those improvements in the same year. If you wait until the next year, you've already had it in service for one tax year. Now the improvements are being done in the next tax year. So I mentioned that because it comes up a lot. A lot of folks will ask me about that, how to maximize the tax savings. Now, certainly if you're buying something in October and there is a fence or a railing that's falling down and is a safety hazard, or if there's a gas leak and there's a safety hazard or whatever, you got to make that repair or you got to make that renovation right then and there, so you can sleep at night knowing that your tenants are going to be safe. You can't think about the tax saving that you may potentially be losing, but you really want to make that renovation so that tenant can be safe, so that you can sleep at night knowing that you've done the right thing. If it's something that cosmetic that you may be able to put off until the following year, that might be another story. You may be able to take advantage of that partial asset disposition by waiting till the next year. But in all situations, I would put safety at 100% priority over any type of tax savings, because it could really come back to bite you in the butt if you didn't put safety first. So how do you get started? What do you need in order to think about doing a cost segregation study? All we need to prepare an estimate, and we prepare thousands of these estimates every year. Maybe there was a real estate listing or an offering memorandum. Maybe just if you've owned the property for a number of years, we'd like to see a depreciation schedule to see how that property has been accounted for over the past. If it's something that you're just buying, I mentioned the real estate listing, an offering memorandum, or just a phone call to me and say, "Hey, I'm spending $150,000 on this townhouse on Monument Street, and I'm going to put another $80,000 into it. I'm going to do renovations here, there, new roof, new this, new that. The address is, 3600 East Monument Street." We can prepare a estimate just off of that basic information. So, and also, the year and the month that it is going to be placed in service. So with that said, I've really enjoyed presenting, sharing this information. It just tickles me that we can now bring this to mom and pop building owners like you and I who have buildings that are $150,000 and above, and offer this tax savings that traditionally only the big mega $1 million properties could have access to in the past. So I'm happy to provide an estimate for any building that you've got out there. Happy to take a phone call and answer any questions you might have. We're all here to help each other. Thank you.
Awesome. That was great, Jerry. Thank you so much for doing that. I know there's a lot of value. And it's interesting because I think, as I mentioned in the beginning, that a lot of people used to think the cost segregation is really just for multifamily, commercial, things of that nature. And it's so refreshing to be able to see that now we can do that at the residential level, which is where a lot of people get started anyway.
Sure.
You and I briefly touched on Airbnb in the beginning. I know that is, assisted living, Airbnb. Are those qualities that can be or candidates for doing a cost segregation as well?
Absolutely. Yeah. In fact, we are doing more and more of the Airbnb cost segregations these days than we were 3 years ago. Yeah. And so residential rental properties are depreciating over 27 and a half years. The Airbnb, being a very short-term rental, is going to depreciate over the longer time cycle of 39 years. So the more depreciation we can find in a hurry in that 39-year depreciable asset,
Right.
the better bang for the buck the client's going to get.
Okay, outstanding. I like the it's amazing to me. You don't really think about it unless you've actually renovated a house in terms of all of the different line items there are that you can actually depreciate. To me, that's just amazing. I was looking at all the different labels for all the different things you had there and made me think, oh, that's right. There's an awful lot of stuff in a property that you can depreciate and actually keep money in your pocket as opposed to giving it to Uncle Sam. That's fantastic. So,
Yeah.
and then I love your point of uh, most people that get into real estate get in with the idea of creating wealth for the future, right? They want to create
Sure.
income, they want to create wealth. And I think a lot of times people get stuck in only being able to buy one house a year, one house every couple of years, whatever it is. And I think at this point, the more money you can save now, to your point with cost segregation, the more money you have to put into your next property, and you do it with that one, you go to your next property, it's almost exponential, it sounds like, the amount of money that you can save with cost segregation to reapply. And yes, you can go out and buy a car, whatever you want to
Yeah.
do,
Oh, you
right?
could. Sure.
So
Take
do
a
that
nice
too.
trip.
We usually recommend people take that and kind of reapply it and kind of build your portfolio faster and get to whatever level of passive income you want to get to, whether it be $10,000 a month or $100,000 a week or whatever it may be. Cost segregation definitely sounds like a way to get there a lot faster. So that is fantastic. So I think that we are done for the day. What we're going to do, everybody, is we're going to edit this video and we're actually going to email it out to the list. So if you're on our mailing list or you're on meetup.com, we'll send it out to everybody. We'll also send it out with Jerry's information as well. And we'll also post it on a YouTube channel. But I think we're pretty much done for the night. Jerry, any last words?
I'm good. I always enjoy working with you, James. Thank you so much for the opportunity. You're a kind soul. You want to get and spread the wealth, spread the good news amongst everybody. So I appreciate that.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks again for your time. Enjoy your time in Philadelphia and Ocean City, and we'll talk to you very soon.
Take care. Bye
Bye.
now.
Bye-bye.